Welcome to a complete reading of Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The place stank, a queer, mingled stench that only ice-buried cabins of an Antarctic camp know, compounded of reeking human sweat and the heavy fish oil stench of melted sea blubber. An overtone of liniment combated the musty smell of sweat and snow-drenched furs, the acrid odor of burnt cooking fat, and the animal not unpleasant smell of dogs, diluted by time, hung in the air. Lingering odors of machine oil contrasted sharply with the taint of harness dressing and leather. Yet somehow through all that reek of human beings and their associates, dogs, machines, and cooking, came another taint. It was a queer, neck-ruffling thing, and the faintest suggestion of an odor alien among the smells of industry and life. It was a life smell, but it came from the thing that lay bound with a cord and tarpaulin on the table, dripping slowly, methodically onto the heavy planks, dank and gaunt under the unshielded glare of the electric light. Blair, the little bald-pated biologist of the expedition, twitched nervously at the wrappings, exposing clear, dark ice beneath, then pulling the tarpaulin back into place restlessly. His little bird-like motions of suppressed eagerness danced his shadow across the fringe of dingy gray underwear hanging from the low ceiling. The equatorial fringe of stiff, graying hair around his neck, and naked skull, a comical halo about his shadow's head. Commander Gary brushed aside the lax legs of the suit of underwear and stepped toward the table. Slowly his eyes traced around the rings of men sardined into the administration building. His tall, stiff body straightened finally and nodded. 37, all here. His voice was low, but carried a clear authority of the commander by nature, as well as by title. You know the outline of the story back to find of the secondary pole expedition? I've been conferring with their second-in-command, McCready, and Norris, as well as Blair and Copper. There's a difference of opinion, and because it involves the entire group, it is only just that the entire expedition personnel act on it. I'm going to ask McCready to give you the details of the story, because each of you have been too busy with its own work to follow closely of the endeavors of the others. McCready? Moving from the smoke-blued background, McCready was a figure from some forgotten myth, a looming bronze statue that held life and walked. 6'4" he stood as he halted beside the table, and with a characteristic glance upward to assure himself of room under the lower ceiling beam, straightened. His rough, clashingly orange windproof jacket he still had on, yet on his huge frame it did not seem misplaced. Even here, 4 feet beneath the wind dread and the wind drift that droned across the Antarctic waste, above the ceiling, the cold of the frozen continent leaked in and gave meaning to the harshness of the man. And he was bronze, his great red bronze beard, the heavy hair that matched it, the gnarled, corded hands gripping and relaxing on the table planks were bronze. Even the deep sunken eyes beneath the heavy brows were bronzed. Age-resisting endurance of the metal spoke in the cracked, heavy outlines of his face and the mellow tones of the heavy voice. Norris and Blair agree on one thing. That animal we found was not terrestrial in origin. Norris fears there may be a danger in that. Blair says there's none. But I'll go back to how and why we found it. To all that was known before we came here. It appeared at this point was exactly over the south magnetic pole of the Earth. The compass does point straight down here, as you all know. The more delicate instruments of the physicists, instruments especially designed for this expedition and its study of the magnetic pole, detected a secondary effect, a secondary, less powerful magnetic influence about 80 miles southwest here. The secondary magnetic expedition went out to investigate it. There's no need for details. We found it, but it was not the huge meteorite or magnetic mountain Norris had expected to find. Iron ore is magnetic, of course, iron more so, and certain special steels even more magnetic from the surface indications. The secondary pole was found so small that the magnetic effect it had was preposterous. No magnetic material conceivable could have had that effect. Soundings through the ice indicated it was within 100 feet of the glacier's surface. I think you should know the structure of the place. There is a broad plateau, a level sweep that runs more than 150 miles due south from the secondary station, Van Wall says. He didn't have time or fuel to fly farther, but it was running smoothly due south then. Right there where that buried thing was, there's a nice downed mountain ridge, a granite wall of unshakable strength that has dammed back the ice creeping from the south. And 400 miles due south is the South Polar Plateau. You've asked me at various times why it gets warmer here when the wind rises, and most of you know. As a meteorologist, I'd have staked my word that no wind could blow at negative 70 degrees, and no more than 5-mile wind could blow at negative 50, without causing warning due to friction with the ground, snow and ice in the air itself. We camped there on the lip of the ice-downed mountain range for 12 days. We dug out camp into the blue ice that formed the surface and escaped most of it, but for 12 consecutive days the wind blew at 45 miles an hour. It went as high as 48 and fell to 41 at times. The temperature was negative 63 degrees. It rose to 60 and fell to 68. It was meteorologically impossible, and it went on uninterruptedly for 12 days and 12 nights. Somewhere to the south, the frozen air of the South Polar Plateau slides down from that 18,000-foot bowl, down a mountain pass over a glacier and starts north. There must be a funneling mountain chain that directs it. It sweeps it away for 400 miles to hit that bald plateau where we found the secondary pole, and 350 miles farther north reaches the Antarctic Ocean. It's been frozen there since Antarctica froze 20 million years ago. There's never been a thaw there. 20 million years ago, Antarctica was beginning to freeze. We've investigated thought and built speculations. What we believe happened was something like this. Something came down out of space, a ship. We saw it there in the blue ice, a thing like a submarine without a conning tower or directive vanes, 280 feet long and 45 feet in diameter at its thickest. Hey, Van space? Yes, but I'll explain that better. McCready's steady voice went on. It came down from space, driven and lifted by forces men haven't discovered yet, and somehow, perhaps something went wrong then. It tangled with Earth's magnetic field. It came south here, out of control probably, circling the magnetic pole. That's a savage country there. But when Antarctica was still freezing, it must have been 1,000 times more savage. There must have been blizzard snowing, as well as drift, new snow falling as the continent glaciated. The swirl there must have been particularly bad, the wind hurling a solid blanket of white over the lip of that now buried mountain. The ship struck solid granite head-on and cracked up. Not every one of the passengers in it was killed, but the ship must have been ruined, her driving mechanism locked. It tangled with Earth's field, Norris believes. Nothing made by intelligent beings can tangle with the dead immensity of a planet's natural forces and survive. One of its passengers stepped out. The wind we saw there never fell below 41, and the temperature never rose above negative 60. Then the wind must have been stronger. There was a drift falling in a solid sheet. The thing was lost completely in 10 paces. He paused for a moment, the deep, steady voice giving way to the drone of wind overhead and the uneasy, malicious gurgling in the pipe of the galley stove. Drift. A drift wind was sweeping by overhead. Right now, by the snow picked up by the mumbling wind, fled in level, blinding lines across the face of the buried camp. If a man stepped out of the tunnels that connected each of the camp buildings beneath the surface, he'd be lost in 10 paces. Out there, the slim, black finger of the radio mast lifted 300 feet into the air, and at its peak was the clear night sky, a sky of thin, whining wind rushing steadily from beyond to another beyond, under the licking, curling mantle of the aurora. And off north, the horizon flamed with the queer, angry colors of the midnight twilight. That was spring 300 feet above Antarctica. At the surface, it was white death, death of a needle-fingered cold driven before the wind, sucking heat from any warm thing, cold and white mist of endless, everlasting drift, the fine, fine particles of licking snow that obscured all things. Kinner, the little scar-faced cook, winced. 5 days ago, he had stepped out to the surface to reach a cache of frozen beef. He had reached it, started back, and the drift wind leapt out of the south. Cold, white death that streamed across the ground blinded him in 20 seconds. He stumbled on wildly in circles. It was half an hour before the rope-guided men from below found him in the impenetrable murk. It was easy for man or thing to get lost in 10 paces. And the drift wind then was probably more impenetrable than we know. MacReady's voice snapped Kinner's mind back to the welcome, dank warmth of the ad building. The passenger of the ship wasn't prepared either, it seems. It froze within 10 feet of the ship. We dug down to find the ship, and our tunnel happened to find the frozen animal. Barclay's ice axe struck its skull. When we saw what it was, Barclay went back to the tractor, started the fire up when the steam pressure built, sent a call for Blair and Dr. Copper. Barclay himself was sick then, stayed sick for 3 days as a matter of fact. When Blair and Copper came, we cut out the animal in a block of ice, as you see, wrapped it, and loaded it onto the tractor for return to here. We wanted to get into that ship. We reached the side and found the metal was something we didn't know. Our beryllium bronze non-magnetic tools wouldn't touch it. Barclay had some tool steel on the tractor that wouldn't scratch it either. We made reasonable tests, even tried some acid from the batteries with no results. They must have had a passivating process to make magnesium metal resist acid that way, and the alloy must have been at least 95% magnesium, but we had no way of guessing that, so when we spotted the barely open locked door, we cut around it. There was clear, hard ice inside the lock where we couldn't reach it, though the little crack we could look in and see that only metal and tools were in there, so we decided to loosen the ice with a bomb. We had a deconite bombs and thermite. Thermite is the ice softener. Deconite might have shattered valuable things, where the thermite's heat would have just loosened the ice. Dr. Copper, Norris, and I placed a 25-pound thermite bomb, wired it, and took the connector up the tunnel to the surface, where Blair had the steam tractor waiting. 100 yards to the other side of the granite wall, we set off the thermite bomb. The magnesium metal of the ship caught, and, of course, the glow of the bomb flared and died. Then it began to flare again. We ran back to the tractor, and gradually the glare built up. From where we were, we could see the whole ice field illuminated from beneath with an unbearable light. The ship's shadow was great, a dark cone reaching off toward the north, where the twilight was just about gone. For a moment it lasted, and we counted 3 other shadow things that might have been other passengers frozen there. Then the ice was crashing down and against the ship. That's why I told you about the place. The wind sweeping down from the pole was at our back. The steam and hydrogen flame were torn away in white ice fog, and the flaming heat under the ice was there and yanked away before the Arctic Ocean, before it even touched us. Otherwise we wouldn't have come back, even with the shelter of that granite ridge that stopped the light. Somehow in the blinding inferno we could see great hunched things, black bulks glowing. Even so, they shed even the furious incandescence of the magnesium for a time. Those must have been the engines, we knew. Secrets going in blazing glory, secrets that might have given man the planets, mysterious things that could lift and hurl that ship and had soaked in the force of the Earth's magnetic field. I saw Norris's mouth move and ducked. I couldn't hear him. Insulation, something gave way. All Earth's fields they soaked up 20 million years before broke loose. The aurora in the sky above licked down, and the whole plateau was bathed in cold fire that blanketed vision. The ice axe in my hand got red hot and hissed on the ice. Metal buttons on my clothes burned into me, and a flash of electric blue seared upward from beyond the granite wall. Then the walls of ice crashed down on it. For an instant, it squealed the way dry ice does when it's pressed between metal. We were blind and groping in the dark for hours. Our eyes were covered. We found every coil within a mile was fused rubbish. The dynamo and every radio set, the earphones and speakers, If we hadn't had the steam tractor, we wouldn't have gotten over to the secondary camp. Van Wall flew in from the big magnet at sunup and, we came home as soon as possible. That's the history of that. McCready's great bronze beard gestured toward the thing on the table. Chapter 2. Blair stirred uneasily, his little bony fingers wriggling under the harsh light. Little brown freckles on his knuckles slid back and forth as tendons under the skin twitched. He pulled aside a bit of tarpaulin and looked impatiently at the dark ice-bound thing inside. McCready's big body straightened somewhat. He'd ridden the rocking, jarring steam tractor 40 miles that day, pushing on to the big magnet here. Even his calm will had been pressed by the anxiety to mix again with humans. He was lone and quiet out there in the secondary camp, where a wolf wind howled down from the pole. Wolf wind howling in his sleep, winds droning in the evil, unspeakable face of that monster, leering up as he'd first seen it, through the clear blue ice, the ice and bronze ice axe buried in its skull. The giant meteorologist spoke again. Problem is them. Blair wants to examine the thing, thaw it out, and make microslides of its tissues and so forth. Norris doesn't believe that it's safe, and Blair does. Dr. Copper agrees pretty much with Blair. Norris is a physicist, of course, not a biologist, but he makes a point I think we should all hear. Blair has described the microscopic life forms biologists find living, even in the cold, inhospitable places. They freeze every winter and thaw every summer for 3 months and live. The point Norris makes is they thaw and live again. There must have been microscopic life associated with this creature. There is with every living thing we know, and Norris is afraid that we might release a plague, some germ disease unknown to Earth, if we thaw those microscopic things that might have been frozen there for 20 million years. Blair admits that such microlife might retain the power of living. Such unorganized things as individual cells can retain life for unknown periods when solidly frozen. The beast itself is as dead as those frozen mammoths they find in Siberia. Organized, highly developed life forms can't stand that treatment, but microlife could. Norris suggested that we may release some disease form that man, never having met it before, will be utterly defenseless against. Blair's answer is that there may be such still living germs, but that Norris has the case reversed. They are utterly non-immune to man. Our life chemistry probably. The little biologist's head lifted in a quick bird-like motion. A halo of gray hair about his bald head ruffled as though angry. One look. I know, McCready acknowledged. The thing is not earthly. It does not seem likely that it can have a life chemistry sufficiently like ours to make cross-infection remotely possible. I would say that there is no danger. McCready looked toward Dr. Copper. The physician shook his head slowly. None whatsoever, he asserted confidently. Man cannot infect or be infected by germs that live in such comparatively close relatives as the snakes. And they are, I assure you. His clean-shaven face grimaced uneasily. Much clearer to us than that. Vance Norris moved angrily. He was comparatively short in his gathering of big men, some 5'8", and his stocky, powerful build tended to make him seem shorter. His black hair was crisp and hard, short, like short steel wires, and his eyes were the gray of fractured steel. If McCready was a man of bronze, Norris was all steel. His movements, his thoughts, his whole bearing had the quick, hard impulse of steel spring. His nerves were steel, hard, quick-acting, swift corroding. He was decided on his point now, and he lashed out in its defense with a characteristic quick, clipped flow of words. Different chemistry be damned. That thing may be dead, or by God it may not, but I don't like it. Damn it, Blair. Let him see the monstrosity you are petting over there. Let him see the foul thing and decide for yourselves whether they want that thing thawed out in this camp. Thawed out, by the way. That's got to be thawed out in one of those shacks tonight, if it is thawed out. Somebody, who's watchman tonight? Magnetic, continent, cosmic rays tonight. Well, you get to sit up with that 20 million-year-old mummy of his. Unwrap it, Blair. How the hell can they tell what they are buying if they can't see it? It may have a different chemistry. I don't know what else it has, but I know it has something I don't want. If you can judge by the look on its face, it isn't human, so maybe you can't. It was annoyed when it froze. Annoyed, in fact. It's just about as close to an approximation of that way it felt as crazy, mad, insane hatred. Neither one touches the subject. How the hell can these birds tell what they're voting on? They haven't even seen those 3 red eyes and the blue hair like crawling worms. Crawling, damn. It's crawling there in the ice right now. Nothing Earth ever spawned had the unutterable sublimation of devastating wrath that thing let loose in its face when it looked around this frozen desolation 20 million years ago. Mad? It was mad clear, though. Searing, blistering mad. Hell, I've had bad dreams ever since I looked at those 3 red eyes. Nightmares. Dreaming the thing thawed out and came to life and that it wasn't dead or even wholly unconscious all those 20 million years. Just slowed, waiting. You'll dream too. All that damn thing in the earth wouldn't own its dripping on the Cosmos house tonight. Incontinent, Norris whipped toward the cosmic rays specialist. Won't you have fun sitting up all night in quiet, wind whining up above, and that thing dripping? He stopped for a moment and looked around. I know that's not science, but it's psychology. You'll have nightmares for a year to come. Every night since I looked at that thing I've had them. That's why I hate it. Sure I do, and I don't want it around. Put it back where it came from and let it freeze for another 20 million years. I had some swell nightmares that it wasn't made like we are, which is obvious, but of a different kind of flesh that it can easily control, that it can change its shape and look like a man, and wait to kill and eat. That's not a logical argument. I know it isn't. The thing isn't Earth logic anyway. Maybe it has an alien body chemistry, and maybe its bugs do have a different body chemistry. A germ might not stand that, but Blair and copper, how about a virus? That's just an enzyme molecule, you said. I wouldn't need anything but a protein molecule of any body to work out. And how are you so sure of that? Of the million of varieties of microscopic life it might have? None of them are dangerous? How about diseases like hydrophobia, rabies, that attacks any warm-blooded creature, whatever its body chemistry may be? A parrot fever? Have you a body like a parrot, Blair? And plain rot, gangrene, necrosis do you want? That isn't choosy about body chemistry. Blair looked up from his puttering long enough to meet Norris's angry gray eyes for an instant. So far, the only thing you have said this thing gave off that was catching was dreams. I'll go so far as to admit that. An impish, slightly malignant grin crossed the little man Steam's face. I had some too, sort dream infectious, no doubt an exceedingly dangerous malady. So far as your other things go, you have a badly mistaken idea about viruses. In the first place, nobody has shown that the enzyme molecule theory, that alone explains them. In the second place, when you catch tobacco mosaic or wheat rust, let me know. A wheat plant is a lot nearer to your body chemistry than this other-world creature is. And your rabies is limited, strictly limited. You can't get it from or give it to a wheat plant or a fish, which is a collateral descendant of a common ancestor of yours, which is, Norris is not. Blair nodded unpleasantly toward the tarpaulin bulk on the table. Well, thaw the damn thing in a tub of formalin if you must thaw it. I've suggested that. And I've said that there'd be no sense in it. You can't compromise. Why did you and Commander Gary come down to study magnetism? Why weren't you content to stay home? There's magnetic force enough in New York. I could no more study the life in this thing once had from a formalin-picked sample than you could get from the information you wanted back in New York. If this one is so treated, never in all time to come can there be a duplicate. The race it came from must have passed away in the 20 million years it lay frozen, so that even if it came from Mars then, we'd never find its like, and the ship's gone. There's only one way to do this, and that is the best way possible. It must be thought slowly, carefully, and not in formalin. Commander Gary stood forward again. and Norris stepped back, muttering angrily. I think Blair's right, gentlemen. What do you say? Conant grunted. Sounds right to us, I think. Only perhaps he ought to stand watch over it while it's thawing. He grinned ruefully, brushing a stray lock of ripe cherry hair back from his forehead. So idea, in fact, sits up with his jolly little corpse. Gary smiled slightly. A general chuckle of agreement rippled over the group. I think any ghosts it may have had would have starved to death if it hung around here that long, Conant, Gary suggested. And you look capable of taking care of it. Iron Man Conant ought to be able to take out any opposing players still. Conant shook himself uneasily. I'm not worrying about ghosts. Let's see that thing. Eagerly, Blair was stripped back the robes. A single throw of the tarpaulin revealed the thing. The ice had melted somewhat in the heat of the room, and it was clear and blue, as thick, good glass. It shone wet and sleek under the harsh light of the unshielded globe above. The room stiffened abruptly. It was face up there in the plain, greasy planks of the table. The broken half of the bronze ice axe was still buried in the queer skull. 3 mad, hate-filled eyes blazed up with a living fire, bright as fresh spilled blood from a face ringed with a writhing, loathsome nest of worms, blue, mobile worms that crawled where the hair should grow. Van Wall, 6 feet and 200 pounds of ice-nerved pilot, gave a queer, strangled gasp and butted, stumbled his way out to the corridor. Half the company broke for the doors. The others stumbled away from the table. McGrady stood at one end of the table watching them, his great body planted solid on his powerful legs. Norris, from the opposite end, glowered at the thing with smoldering heat. Outside the door, Gary was talking with 6 of the men at once. Blair had a tack hammer. The ice that cased the thing scuffled crisply under its steel claws as it peeled from the thing it had cased for 20,000 years. Chapter 3. I know you don't like that thing, Conant, but it just has to be thought out right. You say leave it as it is till we get back to civilization. Alright, I'll admit your argument that we could do a better and more complete job there is sound, but how are we going to get this across the line? But we have to take this through one temperate zone, one equatorial zone, and halfway through the other temperate zone before we get it to New York. You don't want to sit with it one night, but you suggest then that I hang its corpse in the freezer with the beef? Blair looked up from his cautious chipping. His bald, freckled skull nodded triumphantly. Kinner, the stocky, scar-faced cook, saved Conant the trouble of answering. Hey, you listen, mister. You put that thing in the box with the meat, and by all the gods, therefore, I'll put you in it to keep it company. You birds have brought everything movable in this camp into my mess table here already, and I had to stand for that. But you go putting things like that in my meat box or even my meat cache here, and you can cook your own dang grub. But Kinner, this is just one table and big magnet that's big enough to work on, Blair objected. Everybody explained that. Yeah, and everybody's brought everything in here. Clark brings his dogs every time there's a fight and sews them up on that table. Ralston brings in the sledges. Hell, the only thing you haven't had on that table is the Boeing. You'd have had that in if you could have figured a way to get through the tunnels. Commander Gary chuckled and grinned at Van Wall, the huge chief pilot. Van Wall's great blond beard twitched suspiciously as he nodded gravely to Kinner. You're right, Kinner. The aviation department is the only one that treats you right. It does get crowded, Kinner, Gary acknowledged, but I'm afraid we'll all find it that way at times. Not much privacy in an Antarctic camp. Privacy? What the hell's that? You know, the things really made me weep was when I saw Barkley marching through your chin. The last lumber in the camp, and carrying out to build that house on his tractor. Damn it, I missed that moon caught in the door he carried out, more than I missed the sun when it set. That wasn't just the last lumber Barkley was walking off with. He was carrying off the last bit of privacy in this blasted place. A grin rode even on Connon's heavy face as Kinner's perennial good-natured grouch came up again, but it died away quickly as his dark, deep-set eyes turned again to the red-eyed thing Blair was chipping from its cocoon of ice. A big hand ruffled his shoulder-length hair and tugged at a twisted lock that fell behind his ear in a familiar gesture. "I know that cosmic ray shack's going to be too crowded if I have to sit up with that thing," he growled. "Why can't you go and chipping the ice away from around it? You can do that without anybody butting in, I assure you, and then hang the thing over the power plant boiler. That's warm enough. I'll thaw out a chicken, even a whole side of beef in a few hours." "Ah, no," Blair protested, dropping the tack hammer to gesture more effectively with his bony, freckled fingers, his small body tense with eagerness. "This is too important to take any chances. There's never a find like this. There never can be again. It's the only chance men will ever have, and it has to be done exactly right. Look, you know how the fish we caught down near the Ross Sea would freeze almost as soon as we got them on deck, and come to life again we'd thaw them gently. Low forms of life aren't killed by quick freezing and slow thawing. We have..." "Hey, for the love of heaven, you mean that damn thing will come to life?" Conant yelled. "You get that damn thing? Let me at it. That's going to be in so many pieces." "Oh, no, you fool." Blair jumped in front of Conant to protect his precious find. "No, just low forms of life. For Pete's sake, let me finish. You can't thaw higher forms of life and have them come too. Wait a moment now, hold it. Fish can come after freezing because it's so low form of life that the individual cells of its body can revive, and that alone is enough to reestablish life. Any higher forms thawed out or that way are dead. Though the individual cells revive, they die because there must be organization and cooperative effort to live. That cooperation cannot be reestablished. There's a sort of potential life in any uninjured, quick-frozen animal, but it can't under any circumstances become active life in higher animals. The higher animals are too complex, too delicate. There's an intelligent creature as high in its evolution as we are in ours, perhaps higher. It is as dead as a frozen man would be." "How do you know?" demanded Conant, hefting the ice axe he had seized a moment before. Commander Gary laid a restraining hand on his heavy shoulder. "Wait a minute, Conant. I want to get this straight. I agree that there is going to be no thawing of this thing if there is the remotest chance of its revival. I quite agree it is much too unpleasant to have alive, but I have no idea there is the remotest possibility." Dr. Copper pulled his pipe from between his teeth and heaved his stocky, dark body from the bunk he had been sitting on. "That's being technical. If that's dead, as dead as the mammoths they find frozen in Siberia. Potential life is like atomic energy. There, but nobody can get it out, and certainly won't release itself except in rare cases, as rare as radium in that chemical analogy. You have all sorts of proof that things don't live after being frozen, not even fish, generally speaking, and no proof of higher animal life can under any circumstances. What's the point, Blair?" The little biologist shook himself, the little ruff of hair standing out around his bald pate waved in righteous anger. "Point is," he said in an injured tone, "that the individual cells might show the characteristics they have in life, but it's properly thawed. A man's muscle cells live many hours after he has died, but just because they live and a few things like hair and fingernail cells still live, you wouldn't accuse a corpse of being a zombie or something. Now, if I thaw this right, I may have a chance to determine what sort of world it's native to. We don't and can't know by any other means whether it came from Earth or Mars or Venus or from beyond the stars. And just because it looks unlike men, you don't have to accuse it of being evil or vicious or something. Maybe that expression on its face is equivalent to a resignation to fate. White is the color of mourning to the Chinese. If men can have different customs, why can't so different race have different understandings of facial expressions?" Conant laughed softly, mirthlessly. "Peaceful resignation. If that's the best it can do the way of resignation, I should have exceedingly disliked seeing what it looks like when mad. That face was never designed to express peace. It just didn't have any physiological thoughts like peace in its makeup. I know it's your pet, but be sane about it. The thing grew up on evil adolescent slowly roasting alive in the local equivalent of kittens, and amused itself through maturity on its new ingenious torture. You haven't the slightest right to say that, snapped Blair. How do you know the first thing about the meaning of facial expression inherently inhuman? It may well have no human equivalent whatever. That's just a different development of nature, another example of nature's wonderful adaptability. Growing on another, perhaps harsher world has a different form and features, but it is just as much a legitimate child of nature as you are. You're displaying the childish human weakness of hating the different. On its own world, it would probably class you as a fish-bellied white monstrosity with an insufficient number of eyes and a fungoid body pale and bloated with gas. Just because its nature is different, you haven't any right to say it's evil. Norris burst out a single explosive. Ha! He looked down at the thing. Maybe that thing's formed from other worlds don't have to be evil just because they're different. But that thing was. Child of nature, huh? Well, it was a hell of an evil nature. Oh, you mugs got crabbing at each other and get the damn thing off my table? Kinner growled. I put a canvas over it. Looks indecent. Kinner's got modest, jeered Conant. Kinner slanted his eyes to the big physicist. The scarred cheek twisted to join the line of his tight lips in a twisted grin. All right, big boy, and what were you grousing about a minute ago? We can set the thing in a chair right next to you tonight if you want. I'm not afraid of its face, Conant snapped. I don't like keeping a wake over its corpse particularly, but I'm gonna do it. Kinner's grin spread. Uh-huh. Then he went off to the galley stove and shook down its ashes vigorously, drowning the brittle chirping of the ice as Blair fell to work again. Thank you. That was part 1 of Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. Thank you for listening, and good night.